Thanks very much, Sue. So just to introduce my session, basically Winkle we're a market research agency that specialise in innovation research. So a lot of the time we're using the work we do to help commercial brands, commercial services to explore and identify gaps, to develop propositions and positionings, and then also to test the performance of the propositions, the positionings they come up with, and make those as good as they possibly can be. So what I'm going to look at today, though, is how we can take that approach and our mindset that we use for innovation research and apply that in a bit of a different area. Can we apply that, and how can we apply that to help non-commercial organizations, non-profit organizations? And specifically, I'm going to take you through some of the learnings from a study we conducted for Amnesty International. So, to set the scene, Amnesty International actually has, in some of the markets around the world, awareness as high as 90%, so pretty high awareness levels. But even then, when you talk to people about what they actually feel towards Amnesty International, even in those markets with very high awareness levels, they feel they lack a sense of connection, and this obviously can then in turn impact fundraising efforts if people haven't got that kind of that real rich connection and emotional connection with the organization. So why is that, and how can innovation research help to deepen that connection and therefore attract more donors? So the journey we went on with Amnesty is in a lot of ways similar to the same one we do for commercial brands when we work with them as well on innovation challenges. Here it looks like nicely simplified steps, but I think it's an important process and a process that we found that works and delivers consistent results. So first off, we start by gathering clues, understanding what's going on in the marketplace or in the market as it stands. Then we look for the gaps, and then we use those learnings to reveal challenges that have got to be overcome, but also opportunities that can potentially help to grow that brand if those challenges can be overcome. Just to step back a little in terms of how we think research can play a role for brands to grow, and why we feel brands engage with research. I mean, basically, they want to make informed business decisions to drive their growth. It's all about growth, for commercial organizations at the end of the day. And even for non-profits, obviously, they want to achieve their ends, which are not commercial, but they need money to achieve those ends. So in a sense, they're still looking to drive fundraising growth. So we start with the end in mind. We think it's important that researchers immerse deeply in whatever the process is for that particular project, so whatever the shopping experience, the service usage experience, the charitable supporting, donating experience. You've got to sort of immerse into that with a curious attitude and an open mind. We think it's important to generate hypotheses up front. So, what are the possible drivers that are at play, and what are the possible directions a brand could change or evolve? And then ultimately, research can only ever talk to a proportion of the population. We can't talk to everybody. So what we have to boil it down to is a simplified framework of the real world, so that we can understand in that simplified way how we think the market is working, how consumers or supporters are being driven, and then within that context we can make recommendations on clear kind of actions that our clients can take. So how do we actually do that, just to sort of break that down into some sort of tangible steps? So typically we start by looking at perception. So how is the brand or the service, or in this case the charity, how is it perceived today? And then we look at the needs and the attitudes that brand or service is is operating in the context of. So what are the needs out there at the moment that are going to influence how people react and interact with that particular brand? Then obviously we look for the gaps. Okay, on one side we know what people's perceptions and their needs and attitudes are, and on the other side we look to see what the what the gaps against those needs are. By doing that, we can then work out what the opportunities are that the brand could, the brand or the service can potentially address. And in our experience, we found that successful innovation is generally built on some key pillars. We can break that into the three most important elements. Successful innovation is built on the foundation of a strong insight. Now for us, our definition of an insight is a fresh understanding of a deep consumer motivation that triggers new ideas. So it's something new, it's a deep understanding of what's going on in a consumer's head, and from it naturally business implications and business opportunities should come. We think the next key element is you've got to have a single-minded focus on a tangible big benefit, and that's got to have emotional resonance for people to buy into it. And then you've obviously got to persuade people that you can actually deliver that big benefit, and that's where there's a need for a clear reason to believe. Now this sort of three-step framework of a strong insight, a big benefit, and a clear reason to believe are at the heart, we believe, of all successful innovation. And we think this is a key learning that can be applied to the ways an NGO or a charity might look at its fundraising efforts, although this perhaps might not be the kind of mindset they've traditionally come from. So, getting to the study we actually did for Amnesty, what were the details of that? I'm not going to go into too many of them, but basically it was an online survey with an online representative sample. We did the study across 15 countries. In total, we had a very robust analysis data set of 4,612 respondents, and that was around 300 respondents per market. So we've got a very rich base from which to draw our learnings. So starting to go through those four areas I talked about, I said we were going to look at perceptions, then we're going to look at needs, consumers' needs, we're going to look at the gaps between the perceptions and the needs, and then we're going to identify the opportunities. So starting with the perceptions, well, Amnesty today is seen as a courageous and global champion of civil and political rights. So break that down a bit more, that means it's associated with opposing the death penalty, opposing torture, opposing human trafficking. It's got associations as well with children's and women's rights, minority groups, freedom of speech, equality for minorities, and opposing discrimination. They're the key areas people associate with Amnesty. But we see Amnesty's still got a job to do. Its awareness levels, earlier on I talked about the fact that it can be as high as 90%. However, across these 15 markets, we also saw that awareness levels can be as low as just 6%. So it's a big range. So there's still a job to actually create awareness in some of their markets. In addition, the key issue is even in markets where people are aware of Amnesty, only 4 to 15%, so a pretty low proportion, actually feel they've got a good understanding of what Amnesty really does. So they might have some associations with the areas Amnesty operates in, but in terms of actually the tangible things Amnesty does to address those issues, this is where people's awareness really starts to drop off. And we also see that a large proportion don't feel they have any real kind of connection with Amnesty. There are exceptions. There are some markets out of the 15 we looked at where people do feel they have a better connection with Amnesty. France, Italy, Poland, India came to the surface there as markets where that measurement of of how strongly connected you feel to Amnesty as an organisation was much stronger. Why are those markets? Well, I'm going to sort of tease you with that for now and come back to that a little bit later on in the session, just in terms of what seems to be going on a little differently in some of those markets and what we can learn from that. So we've looked at the perceptions and like I said, the context within which Amnesty is operating. Now if we look at the needs, well actually the top issues that people expect NGOs to address, certainly some of them here overlap with the areas that Amnesty's got association with. So human trafficking, discrimination, children's rights, women's rights, those are all areas Amnesty operates in, and they're also areas people expect NGOs to act. There's some extra ones though we're seeing now on this list: poverty, access to water and food, disaster relief, education, healthcare. There are other issues that come to the fore. However, when we actually push it one step further and we ask people, well, what are the issues you think are most important? You know, if not everything can be done, what are the ones that really are the most important to be done? Here we see a very consistent picture across the markets: access to water and food, education, and healthcare, the three consistent top most important issues to be addressed. We're now going to look at the gaps. So we've looked at the perceptions, we then looked at people's needs. So I think probably from what I've been saying, you'll already start to guess where some of those gaps are. There is a bit of a mismatch between Amnesty's core themes and the issues that are found most important. Opposing torture and the death penalty have been core themes for Amnesty for many years. However, they actually appear pretty low down people's associations with human rights. Amnesty's very much been targeting civil and political rights, but the issues actually, when we push, that people feel are the most important ones are actually more fundamental really on kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it's access to water and food, it's healthcare, and it's education. Those more fundamental basic rights are what people are feeling are the most important human rights. The other challenge for Amnesty is actually, it's worse still that some of Amnesty's core themes can actually have some negative associations. In Brazil, some consumers, or some people rather, feel that human rights actually get abused rather to protect bandits and criminals. In the UK also there can be a little bit of cynicism that sometimes human rights are abused by criminals and asylum seekers. There can also be a little bit of negative connection with the European Union for some parts of the UK, where they feel that, you know, human rights are one of these things that it's kind of unelected EU officials in Brussels kind of imposing on us. And this idea of human rights being something that are imposed on you gets even more extreme in Russia, where we actually see that there's a bit of a sentiment that human rights are something dictated by the Western world, and, you know, they're not sort of made here in terms of, you know, this isn't a Russian interpretation of human rights, it's being sort of foisted on us. Also, I think, you know, whereas issues like access to food and water, healthcare are very clear and you wouldn't have, they're not particularly controversial, but also they're quite easy to get your head around, some of the issues that Amnesty faces, or Amnesty addresses rather, are rather more abstract and complex issues. So equity, equal rights, fairness, freedom of speech, you know, these are things that it's not so clear-cut what that even means from one person to another. So it's a more complex area that Amnesty is obviously operating in. Another complexity is actually there are differences across the world. So in Russia, we see that actually privacy is a much more important human right than we see at the global average. Now maybe that has some background in, you know, Russia's Soviet Union past, where perhaps the state was a little bit more controlling of what people could do, and therefore there's some legacy there that privacy is still considered a very important human right. Also, at the same time, we see the Russians are less likely to associate human rights with sexual identity. That's not something that's at the top of their list. Other differences in other markets. In Japan, well, generally the Japanese are a bit more indifferent towards the idea of human rights. And again, there's when you push into, well, what are the most important human rights for you? there's some different answers coming up in Japan compared to the average across all 15 markets. So we see again, like Russia, privacy is actually the top one, social security is the second most important, and then disaster relief. Now maybe some of the recent disasters that have happened with the earthquakes and the nuclear stations in Japan have pushed disaster relief higher up their own kind of domestic agenda. In South Africa, we see that there's an issue of language. People want to be free to speak their own language. In the US, freedom of religion comes out. And in Germany, well, actually, Amnesty's core theme of the death penalty is very resonant in Germany, and also the use of drones seems to ring a strong chord for the Germans. So there's, again, another challenge is just, there's different things going on in these different people in the different markets and different cultures. So with all that as the context of both how people perceive Amnesty today, what are the needs they're looking for, and then going through those gaps and challenges, what do we then see are the key opportunities in terms of the ways Amnesty going forward can build more connection? And again, I want to take us back to the way that we look at, well, what's our background, Winkle's background in innovation, and what do we feel are those fundamental pillars again of a strong, successful innovation. So again, we think they're built on a foundation of a strong insight. They focus on a tangible big benefit, and that should have emotional resonance. And there needs to be a clear reason to believe. I need to be able to be sure that if I buy your product or your service, you're going to give me what I'm buying into. Or if I donate my money, if you're an NGO, how do I know you're actually going to make use of that money and make a difference with it? So dealing with these three pillars one by one, the insight, the benefit, and the reason to believe. For us, it's fundamental to try and establish a more positive insight. In our experience, we've seen time and time again that consumers react far more positively to positive insights. So insights that are focused on the desired outcome, they perform consistently much better than negatively worded insights. If you just focus on the problem, you can have a problem that either just people don't connect with it personally, or in the land of products and services, if you attack, say, an existing service or an existing brand someone's already using, often people either it doesn't resonate because they're not a user of that brand, or it doesn't resonate because they feel you're actually attacking their behavior up to this point. So we always find that insights that are much more focused on the desired outcome, but like we said, that tap into that sort of fresh understanding of the deep motivation, they're the insights that really perform strongly. Now, just to be clear, we're not suggesting that Amnesty should just walk away from its core values overnight. That's not at all what we're looking for Amnesty to do here. But rather, it's about Amnesty finding ways to inspire people to care more about the causes that Amnesty holds dear, and therefore how they can attract more donors in that way. Now, a good example of where we see another NGO using a very, very strongly positive insight, Oxfam. Oxfam have got a campaign at the moment, the Lift Lives campaign. Lift one person and they will lift others. When you support Oxfam's life-changing work, unstoppable change takes root in communities around the world. So it's an incredibly positive insight, and I think it taps into a very strong motivational understanding that donors and supporters know that personally they can't make all the change that needs to be made, but perhaps what they can believe is that they can help that journey to begin. They can give the sort of the seed donation that then the person on the ground locally can actually make a difference with. So it's the sort of the knock-on effects. So I think for us the implication is, can Amnesty learn from these other human rights areas and either broaden its campaign base in order to sort of tap into some of the wider areas where Amnesty's already got connection, and at the same time can it also find fresh insights from the positive stories around, well, why do existing Amnesty supporters feel they're making a difference? What is it that can be learnt from there that can then be exploited, rather in the way the Oxfam example is, to sort of create an aha moment in other potential donors so that they feel a connection and they'll start supporting Amnesty actively. On the benefit pillar, it's key to communicate a tangible big benefit. The best benefits for us are clear, they're focused, they're tangible, and they address an emotional need. Now, as we said, the challenge, I think, for Amnesty is its core traditional themes have been not so tangible always. They've been operating in these areas of human rights that can be more abstract on one side, but also they can be potentially more controversial. You know, when Oxfam are trying to give clean water to a village in Africa, I don't think anybody argues on that that's a good thing to do, or has a difficulty getting their head around the idea of even what's got to be done. With some of the areas Amnesty operates in, that's more of a challenge. So that's a key thing to sort of try and overcome. How can you get a more tangible and therefore more emotional connection? Now, coming back to the point I raised earlier, where we saw in certain markets Amnesty already had more of a connection. Well, actually, in those markets, when we look at, well, what are the differences? Where does Amnesty score, sort of, or where is it perceived differently in France and Poland and India compared to elsewhere? Well, actually, it had a much stronger association with educating the population, much stronger association with offering legal aid to ordinary people, and empowering certain groups. So for us, the key difference was that in those markets, they'd managed to get away from sort of, you know, just people associating them with torture and the death penalty, which are things that, frankly, for most ordinary consumers, they haven't had much connection with. So, you know, how can I connect with Amnesty if the key messages it's talking about are things that don't really touch my life? Whereas, obviously, for Oxfam, well, you know, if I'm a parent and I've got children, okay, hopefully in the UK, my children, you know, have got none of the issues that children in Africa or other markets might have, but I can still have empathy. I can still, as a parent, understand, you know, how I would feel if my children were under threat of not having reasonable education or healthcare or food and access to, you know, clean food and water. So,
hi Phil, just Ray here. We've overrun a tad, and I know you've just got one more slide, so if you could do that really quickly, that'd be great.
No problem. So yes, I think it's about making it tangible, make those benefits have a broader resonance, and also better highlight the work it already does that benefit more people, because, you know, in those markets where it already does connect better, it's already managed to tap into issues that more people are feeling the benefit from. And then the last point, so the last pillar, which is the reason to believe, here I think they've really got to explain how their donations are going to be used in a way that connects. And RTB is there, reason to believe is there to give credibility to how you deliver that. Now we see Oxfam, another example from Oxfam, they actually say £25 could drill 3 wells to provide clean, safe water. Another organisation in the UK, Children in Need, a big event just happened in the last few weeks. It's a big televised event that creates a very uplifting, emotional kind of before and after stories. They do lots of little video clips showing this was the problem at the start, this is the amazing sort of story afterwards of how they've transformed the lives of these underprivileged children. So they can really demonstrate how the money is going to be used. I think this is tougher for Amnesty. Again, the abstract nature of the things they're dealing with, and potentially the more squeamish nature of some of the issues they're dealing with, torture and the death penalty. Amnesty is already trying. I already see in their campaigns they're making claims such as £10 per month enables us to send researchers around the world to investigate reports of torture and abuse. But, you know, compared to the Oxfam example, it's potentially, you know, it's addressing an issue that's lower down people's importance list, the torture and abuse, an issue that, again, they can't necessarily all personally connect with so much. And it's still not that tangible. You know, £25 for 3 wells, I know what we're talking. £10 per month to send researchers around the world to investigate, it's a little bit more vague. So again, I think there's an implication that Amnesty needs to develop reason to believe claims that address resonating issues with more specific and quantified examples. So hopefully that gives a good sense to everybody listening of how Winkle, who, like I said, we're specialised in innovation research that we're normally doing for commercial organisations, but how that mindset can also be put to practice for non-commercial organisations. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Phil.